Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to the third part of my A to Z readathon wrap up. This is going to be letters M through Q. And I don't have any of them physically here because they were library books, interlibrary loans, or ebooks, so just imagine that I'm holding something. First up is Mapping the Heavens by Priyamvada Natarajan. I forget the subtitle of this book, but I think the description says that it's basically a tour of the greatest hits of discoveries in cosmology and astronomy, and I agree with that. The reason I enjoyed this wasn't so much for the descriptions of all of the discoveries, because I was familiar with a lot of those, but it's the second half of this book, near the end, where Natarajan really starts to talk more about how science is done differently now. All of the great discoveries that most of us are familiar with, like the man who came up with the theory of relativity or the men who discovered planets in our solar system and such, these are all done by just one great man with a theory who goes out and finds evidence. And that's not how today's and the future's astronomical discoveries are going to be like. It seems to be moving into like this highly theoretical area, requires a lot of expensive equipment and a lot of agreements and international teams of people and multiple funding sources. So you don't have just one person investigating a question, you have hundreds of scientists around the world investigating a question. And I've been thinking about that as I'm reading other nonfiction science works right now, because once I know about it, I'm seeing it everywhere. Just things are done differently now. Society's concept of what a scientist does and how science is done is kind of out of date with modern reality. I think that's very interesting. Aside from that bit, I'm not sure there's anything major that differentiates this book from other popular science books that explain the same discoveries and such, just that Natarajan has a little bit of her own twist on things, and this is from the perspective of I think an Indian American woman. I don't think that is such a major shift in explaining history or anything. It's just if you're interested in maybe reading science nonfiction from female authors, female explainers, then this is one to pick up. And that's the reason how I discovered it. I was looking for a list of nonfiction and science books written by women. I just wanted to find some new names, and so far that list is really paying off. New York 2140 by Stanley Robinson. Oh, how I regret not talking about this book right after I read it, because the details are starting to elude me. It's a very complex book with so much going on in it, and I don't even want to try to fumble my way through to explaining everything in it now. I love how Stanley Robinson's titles tell you exactly when the books are. It's set in New York City in the year 2140, after multiple rises in sea level have inundated and drowned all the major coastline cities in the world, which have by now figured out how to keep the cities alive in water. Some interesting challenges of keeping skyscrapers standing and strong when their foundations are being rotted out by water. This follows multiple characters who live in the MetLife building in New York City, and they all have their own personal stories, their relationships with each other, their jobs, what they're currently doing, and it does kind of culminate in one big thing by the end. But it's really those individual stories and a lot of commentary on how unchecked climate change will affect the world, how people live, the economy. This book is also heavily driven by finance and economics. One of the major things that happens is characters are trying to crash like a real estate market in order to have like a financial revolution in the US, I think. Like I said, it's been quite a while since I read this book, but it was fantastic. I blazed through this book. I enjoyed all the characters so much, and it's a lot of info dumping, and Robinson is completely unapologetic about the info dumping. It reminded me of the attachment I had to characters in the Mars trilogy, but with the kind of structure and experimental style of 2312, which is not my favorite book by Robinson, but he takes, what is the name of the style? I forget. It's the same way that like Stand on Zanzibar was written, which is actually influenced by Dos Passos and the USA trilogy or something, which I haven't read, but you have chapters following each of the characters. You also have chapters solely devoted to info dumping, and I think that that structure worked superbly in this book, far better than it worked in 2312, and it's probably because I just felt I felt more charitable towards the style because I enjoyed the characters and the plot way more than I did everything that was going on in 2312. This is one that I think anybody who's interested in climate change science fiction should read, because it is such pointed commentary on what will happen to us if we continue the way we are right now. Given, of course, that Robinson takes things to extremes for a point, the probability of things happening this exact way are, I think, very low, but it is such good food for thought. For the letter O, I read On a Red Station Drifting by Aliette de Bodard. This is a longer novella-length work in her Chuya universe, which I've read other short stories in, and this is probably by far one of my favorite things I have read by Bodard and in the Chuya universe. On a Red Station Drifting is about a station called Prosper. Prosper Station is kind of like on the outskirts. It's pretty isolated and it's been functioning very well, but the Empire is now at war. They've lost a lot of their people. Prosper Station's mind is starting to fail. It's not working properly and it's forgetting things and not doing things right, which is, it's a bad time for this to happen when everything else is going wrong as well. And a woman shows up on the station. She's committed, I think, kind of a treasonous act as part of the war, and she asks for shelter at the station because she is distantly related to the people there, and so they take her in. And she is in conflict with the de facto head of the family, the major kind of ruling family on the station. You have the mind disintegrating and them dealing with that kind of technical problem, but also the conflicts in the family itself and the problems on their doorstep because of the war. This reminded me quite a bit of reading Ancillary Justice by Ann Leckie, probably because artificial intelligence and space stations are involved, but just the way that the people behave, the culture there within, the rules, the strictures, the etiquette and propriety and ceremony reminded me of some of the cultural aspects of the Imperial Roch series, which probably made me very inclined to enjoy the story from the start. But I enjoyed it because it was a story very motivated by family ties, conflict within family. I think a lot of these stories in the universe are kind of abstract. They deal with problems of culture and society and family that I sometimes find difficult to grasp because I don't understand them. I like more concrete details sometimes, but all the elements came together in this novella and it was just really good. Next up is The Princess Diarist by Carrie Fisher. I gotta be honest, I only read this one because I knew it was nominated for the Best Related Work in the Hugo Awards this year. I saw it at the library, so I grabbed it. It was a really quick read. Like, I think I read it in about an hour and a half. The idea is that Carrie Fisher discovered the diaries that she wrote while filming the first Star Wars movie. It's a very small portion in the middle of the book. Most of this is Fisher describing the fling, the affair she had with Harrison Ford while filming the movie, and talking about the consequences of the fame and whether she thought that Star Wars was going to blow up and be such a big thing. I think in my Goodreads comment on this, I said that this thing she describes with her and Harrison Ford was the least interesting thing I have ever heard about Carrie Fisher and the least appealing thing I have ever heard about Harrison Ford. He just sounds like a really boring guy who just wanted to have sex with her and didn't really want to talk about anything, and then they went their separate ways, end of story. Like, there's nothing there to really talk about. And And then the second thing, which is about the fame, as a really easy answer that she spins into a couple of chapters, which is no, nobody had any idea it was going to be such a big deal. It has had consequences for her life, some of them good, some of them bad. What more is there to say about it than that? It was a really brief book. I think this is almost being pitched as more than it actually is, like kind of hyped up. It's perfectly fine. I just don't think it was sensational. The last one for this part is for the letter Q. That is The Queens Adept by Rodolfo Martinez. This is a translated Spanish fantasy steampunk novel, and I have very mixed feelings about this book. It is set in a secondary world. I could maybe call it another planet. There are a lot of kingdoms and nations there, and the nation of Albonais has received a threat that some mysterious group is going to detonate a bomb in their country or in their capital city, and this bomb will have terrible consequences for their infrastructure, and it will pretty much destroy the country. So an agent of the Queen, Yaxter Brandon, sets out kind of half on his own, half under orders to investigate who is making this threat and how to neutralize it. There are these things called menial bodies that generate messengers. Essentially, menial bodies are these like sacks of flesh thing that grow in what they call dark woods, and they can be like imprinted upon to take different forms and do things. So they're almost like mindless fleshy automatons, and they generate messengers, which I think of as nanobots. This whole world is infused with nanobots. People have them inside of their bodies, and infrastructure is built on what messengers can do for people. I loved the world building ideas in this, the dark woods, the menial bodies, the messengers, manipulating them. Just, this is cool. And it's a blend of fantasy and science fiction, or perhaps science presented as fantasy because people don't understand it, which is like one of my buzzwords. I love books that do that, and I think that the promise of this book and this series is that it is a fantasy world that will probably turn out to be a scientific world. The major problems here, one is I think the translation is off. There is something odd about the writing style, the tone. It just seems flat and distant. Like there is this space between the reader and the action that is very hard to overcome for me. The second thing is that while elements of the world like the menial bodies and the messengers are explained quite well and very interesting, the geography and the geopolitical situation, the diplomatic relations between countries, is never adequately explained. So when you have a character running around the world between countries and suspecting different nations of things, and you don't know like how this is laid out, it's never really described, that is so frustrating. I felt very lost in like the physical realm of the story. The thing that ultimately I could not overcome just on enjoyment level with this is that the main character, Yaxter, is a terrible person. To just give you an example of something that he does, throughout the course of the story, he uses his messengers to infect two women and rewrite them and make them do things that are against their will, and in one case against their fundamental nature. The first one is a teenage girl, a 13-year-old girl who's literally a child that he kind of seduces and rapes, and then she falls in love with him because of what the messengers are doing, rewriting her brain. And the second one is a lesbian woman who hates him and knows what he is doing to her the entire time, and he also has a sexual relationship with her, and it's disgusting and gross, and this doesn't end up well for anybody. The epilogue contains some things that Yaxter does that just push me over the edge. He's a despicable person. He is meant to be a bad person, but I felt like I needed a shower after reading from his perspective. So yes, I was disappointed in this book. I really wanted it to be better. I think it has promise, so I will definitely read the sequel whenever it comes out in English. I've seen some other reviewers say that that translation is supposed to come out in this year. I haven't seen anything official about that though, but I will pick it up in the hopes that the plot will be better, the writing or the translation will be different, and that maybe the main character won't be Yaxter. that is that for this batch of books that I read for the A to Z readathon. If you have read any of these or if you want to and you want to discuss them, please comment down below. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for sticking with me through all these batch reviews. Only like 2 more to go. I will talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.